Thank you both for coming back. I'm almost done with getting through the present into the future. And I know we want to talk a little bit about the mainframe too, and then hopefully there'll be time for other remarks that you may have, Commissioner, if you'd like. So in looking at the letter from Jim Gardner, the official letter of nonconformance, he ends it by saying, "We request the Vermont Department of Labor to provide written assurances that the supplemental benefit discussed above will not be paid utilizing funds in Vermont's unemployment trust fund. That Vermont will seek a legislative remedy in the next legislative session to bring this law into conformity with the federal UC law." Have you done any written response yet to that?
No, we have not.
Okay. And in terms of, I assume, tell me if I'm wrong, that the written response will comply with this request at this point in time, that you're not going to utilize the trust fund dollars and that you will seek a legislative remedy in the next legislative session to bring Vermont law in conformity with federal UC law. Is that fair? Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. So I know I've asked you this in another format, but what ideas do you have to bring the law into conformity at this point?
Well, at this point, the specificity with the law is that, as it stands, as it's written in the plain text of the law, identifies it as a supplemental benefit. I think at that point, it would be up to the legislature to determine if it wanted to move forward with a supplemental benefit using another identified funding source, if it felt that it wanted to rewrite the law or expound on the law. Otherwise, it would, I believe, USDOL would seek to have us review that section of the law if it wasn't going to be implemented as it was.
So just so I'm clear, because you have to respond to him on behalf of the state of Vermont with a legislative remedy. Your suggestion, absent a proposal to be considered by the legislature, your suggestion would be to repeal the law.
Well, that is at the very minimum what we would need to do as currently stand. I think part of what we've testified here to today and what I believe the legislature is hoping to do is find another solution. So it may need to further clarify the law, the benefit as it is in Act 51, but at the very least, if we weren't going to move forward with some type of different benefit or clarification on the benefit, then we would need to review.
When do you have to get this letter to them by, do you know?
I don't believe it identified in here a time. I can look, but I don't believe it.
I think what I'm asking for is the administration thinking or possibly thinking of some replacement here, or are they going to take the path of just, I mean, you have to answer them and you have to say, we are going to seek a legislative remedy. I assume they may want to know what that is. But I'm just trying to be clear that if we don't come up with something, that you will come up with something to repeal the law.
I don't, let me rephrase that. So from the administration standpoint, we have not discussed alternatives to this, given the conversations that are happening right now. So I think, absent, a proposal or an idea from the legislature or a joint agreement between the administration and the legislature, we would at least have to repeal it. But again, there's no timeline, so I do think we would rather see how these conversations go.
Okay. I'll have a couple more things. Senator Ballin and I wrote you a letter on August 28th, and we said in part, we also do not have any record of your department communicating with legislative leadership or the chairs of the Committee of Jurisdiction regarding legislative intent once you learn there might be an issue. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I believe that was already asked and answered in
Okay.
an earlier session.
And have been communicated to us during the veto session, and we could have addressed it then. You said that, you don't know, you weren't sure when the veto session was taking place, I think, and that you don't know if the fifth floor people from the administration were aware of the dilemma that was out there or the possible nonconformance. And you said you had to check your emails. Did you have a chance to check those emails while you were out?
No, I did not.
I would ask that you do so and get back to us if you can. Then Senator Ballin, I go on to say, this is on August 28th, and we heard finally from you on September 1st. We asked you to extend an important basic courtesy to the legislature. Please take several days to get our input prior to any further federal or state action on this issue. How did you respond to that request?
I responded in writing. I'd have to pull it up here.
While you're looking for that, do you think that was a reasonable request on our part?
To ask us to speak with legislative leadership before we made any further action?
Yeah.
Yes, I think that was reasonable.
I guess my understanding is that there may have been a brief conversation that happened later in September between you and the pro tem, but the next thing that we saw, or I saw anyhow, was the letter from you explaining the whole situation with the formal non-conformance letter. So I wasn't aware of any conversations that took place, even though we asked for one as a basic courtesy to the legislature.
I don't know which one you're referring to.
This is the email that Senator Ballant and I sent to you when we first learned about the potential nonconformity. And,
Yes.
and we had heard that you hadn't received the formal letter yet. So we asked as a basic courtesy to the legislature, can you try and put that on hold by talking to USDOL to give us a chance to talk to you? And as far as I'm aware, maybe Senator Ballant has a different reading. I don't think there was any conversation other than we got the formal letter as the next communication.
Yeah, I would just say, so the formal notice from, let me back up for the record, Cameron Wood, Unemployment Insurance Director, Department of Labor. When we spoke with USDOL in early August, after we provided them with the letter that was signed by me, they asked for a conversation. So we met with them, I think it was August 6th, something around there. They informed us based on our interpretation letter what their response would be. And at that time, we asked them for a formal communication explaining that. And so we anticipated that coming very quickly after. And it took, what was it, 3 weeks or 4 weeks to get it. Mr. Chair, we did not have any conversations with USDOL subsequent to that about this topic. So we did not speak with them after your email with the pro tem to the commissioner asking to speak with you all before we had further discussions with USDOL. We haven't spoken with them since.
Right.
So the letter coming from them on September 1st was just, unfortunately, when it came through right after your email on August 28th.
So in our letter, joint letter, the next sentence reads, given that the federal DOL based this decision on your reading of the statute, I assume they would be amenable to a short delay for you to receive our input on legislative intent. So just to be clear, when you got this, you didn't call USDOL or respond saying that, yes, we will try and make that happen. Nothing like that.
No,
I
I
have
mean, we
not
did
spoken
not, no, we did not reach out to USDOL, although I believe the letter, I don't have a copy of it in front of me from the pro temp, asks to seek a delay. Thank you.
I'll read it again. We ask you to extend an important basic courtesy to the legislature. Please take several days to get our input prior to any further federal or state action on this issue. Given that the federal DOL based this decision on your reading of the statute, I assume they would be amenable to a short delay for you to receive our input on legislative intent.
Yeah, so when I read that, I don't read that to mean you are seeking us to reach out to USDOL, only that you would like us to extend the courtesy to the legislature to speak with the legislature before we have further conversations with USDOL. I don't read anything in there that says there was an expectation that we would reach out to USDOL.
I agree with you, but did you do the former? Did you reach?
Yeah, we did not speak to USDOL again.
No, I know, but did you reach out to us to say, yes, we'll talk to you about this?
Well, I responded in writing.
On what date?
On September 1st, I wrote to the pro temp.
And that was and included in that the formal rejection of the formal non-conformance letter, right?
Yeah, well, so I was actually writing, and the pro temp may remember this, I was writing the email or the letter response to her. And literally it was, I think, 7:45 in the evening. And I actually received the DOL determination letter at 7:55 in the evening. So with a date stamp of the next day. So I immediately attached that to the letter I was sending to her. So I did not have any knowledge that the determination was going to come when it did. It just happened literally that it ended up in my inbox 5 minutes before I hit send on the letter.
I think I have two more questions and then going to possible issues. You said earlier this morning that you weren't focused on the veto session and, maybe it sort of happened upon you before you realized it. Is that accurate? You weren't paying attention to?
Yeah, so I'm not involved in the planning of the veto session or in the administration's direction it wants to take with the veto session. So from that perspective, the veto session was not originally set around any Department of Labor items. So I had not been in on any of the planning of that from the administration side. So again, to say I should have known, I think maybe a little out there since I was not involved in any of those conversations regarding planning or timing or scheduling of the veto session.
Okay. So on September 7th, you promptly responded, I think, to some questions I asked through legislative counsel, and I asked, why didn't the department bring this information to the legislature during the veto session? And you responded, the department did not bring this information to the legislature during the session because there was no clear indication from USDOL that there would be a conformity issue associated with the benefit prior to the convening of the June session. That answer doesn't make a lot of sense to me because in the June 14th letter from, I think it was Jim Gardner. I think it was Jim Gardner to you, where they tell you for the second time that there may be a conformance issue. He writes, however, and this is 9 days prior to the veto session, however, the state of Vermont interprets this provision as not changing, if the state of Vermont interprets this provision as not changing the formula for calculating an individual's WBA, but rather as providing a separate supplementary benefit to individuals receiving regular UC, then the funding source for this supplemental payment would have to originate from a source other than the state's unemployment trust funds. Otherwise, it raises a conformity issue with the requirements of additional compensation program. How does that statement on June 14th, how do you reconcile with the fact that you hadn't gotten a signal from them that you would be in non-conformance?
But I think the piece I would add is USDOL has a lot of opinions on a lot of things. And I think the one thing I've learned over the past, especially the past year and a half, is that just because a frontline point of contact for the department believes something to be true, doesn't necessarily mean that is going to be the end result. And so while they may have outlined the law as it is written in an email to us, it was not a formal determination by them. And so I would not take that to be a sure thing. And I think, I would ask Cameron to weigh in here, but I can think of many different times where USDOL has come to us with a compliance conformity perspective, only to have that perspective changed once it moves through the legal channels of USDOL and through the administrator's office. So again, it was an initial response based on a one sentence email that we sent. So no, I did not take that as a formal determination on whether this would be allowed or not. In my mind, there was a lot more due diligence that needed to happen with regards to us working with them to identify exactly which conformity issue they had, whether or not we could move past that conformity issue with the current law. So again, there are a lot of opinions floating around from USDOL, and we get them from all different areas, but only the ones in writing from the administrator or their designee are the ones that really matter in the end.
Okay, I don't know how clear the indication could have been from USDOL on June 14th, and that was the reason you gave for not contacting us, that there was no clear indication. In the last question I asked in writing on September 7th, if the department does have or will have a proposal, is it able to share the information or details regarding the proposal with Senator Sirotkin and his committee? And you wrote back saying, the department is willing to work with the legislative leadership to ensure that any future statutory changes comply with federal law and are able to be administered given the limitations of the current UI mainframe system. Does that mean that you would support $100 million in a conforming fashion?
I can't speak without knowing the details of it. So it really depends on whether or not we're talking about, as it's currently written, paid for out of somewhere else. Again, that's not a decision or a position I can take. If you're talking about how to a square peg into a round hole in the mainframe, I also can't take a position without knowing the details.
Let me just give you a hypothetical, because you said that you can raise the maximum.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's say we raise the maximum, so over 15 years, $100 million would go out. Do you feel any obligation to the bill the governor signed or to the work of the legislature to get $100 million to claimants?
I can't speak to that without talking to the administration. I don't dare to presume that I can take a position on something without having a conversation with the governor or his advisors. So, that is one of the maximum weekly benefit amount is one of the areas we've talked about that has the potential to be changed. And if that's how the legislature wanted to move forward, I would, again, I'm not going to comment until I've had a chance to talk with the governor or his staff.
Senator Brock.
Kind of to zip to the bottom line. You're aware of this issue. What's your solution?
So I think the question, which issue? I mean, there are many different options.
The issue is the $100 million and the legislature's vote, even though I may not have agreed with it, to do so.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have a solution? Do you have a plan? Have you worked with others in the administration to come up with a plan as to how you're going to solve this problem, if you're going to solve this problem, or have you decided not to?
I think there's a fundamental difference. I'll be completely honest about whether or not people feel that there's an obligation on behalf of the department and the administration to fix the issue, or if that lays at the feet of the legislature. I mean, I will go on record saying the legislature moved extremely quickly on this. It did not do its due diligence. It did have legislative counsel weigh in. But again, it was all based on theory and not fact. And so in the end, we ended up with a bill that did not conform, and no due diligence was taken to make sure the law that resulted in the end actually conformed with the federal requirements. And so there is some ownership that has to be held on the legislature side to how the bill was actually written, constructed, voted on, and implemented. And the fact that they passed something that in the end did not conform with the federal
And
requirements.
so that begs
So I'm-
another question, and that is, once you were aware of the fact that the federal government believed that this was not proper, that whether the legislature didn't do its due diligence or not, do you feel you had an obligation to inform the legislature
I believe I did, and I believe I informed the legislature.
in a
when I
timely
voted.
fashion?
Yeah, based on not just me, but on multiple conversations I had with multiple people leading up to that time. So I was not the sole person that made the decision on when to inform the legislature. That was part of multiple conversations leading up to that date. It did not precede that date by an extended period of time, but there were multiple people involved in when we should notify the legislature, and it was appropriate. There was a desire early on to make sure we had a formal determination from USDOL before we move forward, so that we have all the facts. But again, when the timeline seemed to extend further than what we were comfortable with, that's when we notified the legislature.
And who made that decision?
When to notify the legislature? I would say it was an agreed upon time between myself, individual, other members of the administration, and members of the commissioner's office and the department. There were a number of us that all got together and said, okay, we need to think about when is the best time to inform, how should we do that? And it happened within a matter of days following that.
So this was a consensus decision as opposed to any decision maker making a decision?
And you're not at this point prepared to tell us who was involved in that decision?
Well, in the conversations regarding the $25 benefit, include myself, Cameron, Director Wood, our general counsel, include the deputy commissioner, our policy liaison, the deputy chief of staff from the governor's office. Those were the people who were involved in all of this. Again, at what point I informed Secretary Wilson about this, I don't know the exact date, but we were all part of that conversation leading up to that, and we were all involved on on notifying the legislature when we felt it was appropriate.
And two things. One, so you're unclear, you might be able to check your emails as to when that decision was made. We know the 24th is when you sent the letter out. Do you have any feeling whether it was a matter of a day or two before that, or?
I think it was a matter of maybe 5 to 10 days before that. Again, it was in a matter of a week and a half between when we said, okay, we need to think about how we're going to extend this. Maybe we'll get the determination from USDOL in the next few days and we can send it out at the same time. Then we reached a point where it was clear that the determination was not coming.
When did you find out
Becca
about,
Ballant joined the meeting.
when did you find out about the pending decision? Was that on August 6th?
Which pending? You mean?
The final non-conformance, the letter came first, but on the 24th, you decided to tell us, and you also wrote in there that they're about to issue this decision. When?
Yeah, on the 6th, they identified that they would be moving forward with a determination in the next couple of weeks. That couple of weeks turned into 3 weeks, and I think that was when we said, okay, we need, regardless of whether we have the letter or not, the formal determination.
Do you have
We
any,
need to inform the committees of
you
jurisdiction.
said, they told you they would go ahead with a determination. Did you have on the 6th any doubt what that determination was going to be?
I think we were pretty, at that point, pretty clear in that conversation because we had already issued our determination and they, would not commit. They said they would refer that up through the legal department and the administrator's office, but that, yes, it was likely that they would rely on our determination to decide whether or not it was conforming or not. Those were the conversations with, again, a formal determination, which they said would be following within the next 2 weeks, and that turned into 3. That's when we informed individual.
Thank you. Let me just move on to the mainframe for a second.
That's fine.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Kate,
Oh,
Kate
well,
had a
I mean-
question, and so
I'm sorry.
Feels related, but, you know, we only have a half an hour left, and I'm sure you want to get out of the hot seat. When you say, you know, it's kicked back to the legislature, I still am pleading for a partner to figure this out. You know, I would hope you'd acknowledge that in good faith, we really tried to find a lot of solutions that worked for the current state of the mainframe, as well as to get a supplemental benefit to folks. And so as I'm looking at the July 28th communication from you, Director Wood, to Daniel Hayes, the formal communication really articulates that that option A would be a $25 increase that in many ways sets aside the other parts of the calculation, is what I'm understanding. That this option A was what we hoped to go with by the end of a long legislative process that was added on top of the other calculation that would spit out a particular number for people. Is that correct?
Yeah, I feel like I need to acknowledge something, and that is, I know your words speak to seeking a partnership, but I will be very honest with you, Senator Rahm, your actions do not follow your words. I don't feel as though you have any intent on developing a partnership with the Department of Labor or the administration, and have been pretty combative moving forward. So I'm happy to answer that question, but I will be honest, your actions speak mounds above the words that you're actually saying. I will, to that point, in our comments with Mr. Hayes, you know, we were notified, and Cameron, jump in here because you had conversations with them. We had two routes to go. It could either be implemented as a supplemental benefit. We did have legal interpretation that it was meant to be implemented as a supplemental benefit, or it could be implemented in another form. We also knew that other form really was not possible, or came with an exceptional amount of risk, which we had testified to. And it was made clear during the House Joint Committee with Ways and Means and Commerce that you know, we knew that other option came with a lot of risk, and that it was really intent of, at least during that testimony, that you know, the intent was to not put the department or the state in a position where it would risk or compromise the integrity of the mainframe. And so we knew there were two options: either see it as a supplemental benefit or risk the mainframe integrity. We also knew that the legislature had been very clear and had supported the department in our position. We did not want to risk the integrity of the mainframe. And so that also played into our role about which option we took. Cam, I don't know if you want to add anything.
I would just add for option A and option B, you know, my understanding of the conversation throughout the legislative session, and, you know, the reason, you know, for me and the conversations that I was having leading up to this letter is kind of outlined in the letter, was that we were going to be implementing an FBUC type supplemental benefit. We testified throughout the session about our serious concerns about making underlying changes to the wage calculation. And that's why we landed there. So for me, in my letter, my understanding is our interpretation is doing what we agreed to do. At the end of the day, that is not in compliance with federal law, which I think we all feel is extremely unfortunate and frustrating. But trying to get back to your question, Senator, my understanding is B is, which is the interpretation the department had of what it was intended to be, is what we had agreed to try at the end of the day. Because A, which is the option of tweaking the actual underlying weekly benefit amount calculation and everything that goes along with that, we have serious concerns with doing.
And I just want to respond, I think, to a couple things. So one, directly to respond to what you've said, Commissioner, I have constantly been seeking a partner, and everything I have said publicly and that I'm saying to you now is that I don't feel you have been that partner. And I think that is of concern to unemployed Vermonters. They deserve a partner in the Department of Labor who's helping them through one of the largest unemployment events in history. And I do not feel you have been acting in that regard. What I want to focus on in my question is that I believe other states have increased the underlying benefit that someone's eligible to receive while taking into account the factors in A. So they might look at the overall calculation based on someone's earnings, et cetera, and then say, but because this person has a dependent or has a particular situation, we want to increase the percentage or the actual dollar amount available to that person. Are you saying that what we were trying to do is completely out of conformance with what any other state has tried to do? Did you have that conversation with the U.S. Department of Labor?
So we have had conversations, not necessarily with respect to other departments of labor, but the Department of Labor was very clear that, yes, you can add the additional benefit. It cannot come after the determination of the weekly benefit, the offsetting remuneration, and the chargeback for employers. So there may be other states that have decided to say, we're going to calculate a weekly benefit and we're going to add a dependent benefit on top of that. But then the underlying system actually has to be able to deduct from that any offsetting remuneration, severance pay, vacation pay that's paid out. It has to be able to, if they have other wages that they earn throughout the week, it has to be able to deduct from that calculation, including the additional benefit that was added on there. If there's unpaid child support, it would need to be able to be deducted or withheld from that calculation. And so that is the part where we said we don't feel confident in our ability to implement, whether it's the actual calculation or whether it's an added on benefit at the front end of the process. So we know that once we conduct all those calculations, reductions, remuneration, accountability, chargeback for employers, we can then slap on, add on $25 or add on $300 if it's the federal benefit, because we do that already. But we have never added on an additional benefit at the front end of the process. And we've been informed by our ADS counterparts that doing so would have a high amount of risk associated with it. It would have ripple effects throughout the mainframe that would impact everything from charging to to the entire benefit calculation. And to your point, as we talk about people we are trying to serve, my biggest concern is, yes, if there is a way to get people additional benefits, I'm all for it. I am not willing to risk their current benefit for the $25 benefit. And so at the end of the day, if I know that implementing a $25 benefit has the potential to take the 4,219 claimants that are currently filing and create a system-wide outage or a system-wide miscalculation of their benefits to the point where they miss benefit payments for a week, even if it's 1 week, it could be multiple weeks that we then have to try to recover. Or if it puts them in overpayment and then we have to claw back those funds, those are the risks I'm not willing to take for the sake of what could potentially be, upwards of maybe $500 to $550 after taxes of what someone could claim with that $25 benefit and impact what could be thousands of dollars of their actual benefit.
So when is the overall risk to the system failing going to be addressed? Where is that in the priorities? Because we'll be back in the same place in January unless we have a timeline for how you plan to prioritize the overall security and the input possibilities for.
Yeah, so
the main.
we have been told by numerous people, both in this state and otherwise that our system needs to be replaced. It is at that point of immediacy. And we have already begun meeting with different vendors and demoing different possibilities. I will take this opportunity to say we did seek funding for replacement in 2020, and it was rejected by the legislature. So when you say, when will the department do this? The department has been doing this. The legislature hasn't supported us, which is another piece of saying, when we talk about partnership, right, that is a clear statement.
Could I interrupt?
There's not a partnership
Yes, please,
effort there.
do you mind?
No, go ahead.
Commissioner, you've indicated that the legislature hasn't supported this, but the Joint Information Technology Committee met on this issue in August. And we allocated, as I recall, about $3.5 million for phase one of a multi-phase project that would take 3 to 5 years, as I recall, that was in fact a system replacement strategy, and that it was funded. And the first funding of it was given to the department, and the department presumably has started that process. So I'm confused as to why you say that the legislature rejected what it is that you were going to do, because it seems to me that we're doing it.
So that same request was presented to the legislature in June of 2020. And it was House Appropriations that chose not to further that, or I shouldn't say House Appropriations. It was the Appropriations Committees that chose not to move forward with a $4 million appropriation. So yes, it did move in the 2021 session. It was supported by the Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee. Thank you. But it also delayed all of our efforts by a year.
But is this not also a situation in which the U.S. Department of Labor is currently reevaluating this entire issue? And that state labor departments are delaying the implementation of final changes in the unemployment system in the anticipation that there's very likely to be a federal DOL change that would have an impact on how all of this is being calculated. And so what JTOC did was to authorize the first stage, which was $3.5 million for the next year to 18 months, so that the department could work on preparing the front end again, as the first step for replacing this entire system. Is that what happened?
Well, yes, except where we're now talking about phase one, we could have been talking about the core system, phase 3, 4, and 5, right? So by delaying 12 to 16 months, by not approving phase one originally, we're now 12, 16 months behind schedule. So we're now talking about moving forward with phase one in an RFP process. We could be talking about moving forward with phase 2, 3, and 4 in an RFP process right now. And
Well, you wouldn't move forward with the anticipation that the U.S. Labor Department is going to change the entire system. would
so
you?
I don't have any belief that the U.S. Department of Labor is going to change the entire system. There are components that people are advocating for and associations are advocating for, but they are not, they're not funding and they're not actually working with states on whole system replacement. So what they are looking at is component replacement. And we can talk more about that. I don't want to get into details, but I don't have any faith that the federal government will fund a modernization of our mainframe in my time as commissioner of the Department of Labor.
Well, it's fair to say, though, that in terms of dealing with the issue that we're talking about here today, the notion of having a system to be able to do that in a year or two is virtually zero.
That is absolutely true. We are looking at if we had a vendor on site right now, ready to go, we'd be looking at 2 to 3 years. And that's why we're doing it in phases, so that we can begin to resolve some of the claimant issues that they have faced, but it's a multi-year. There are anywhere from 12 to 15 states that are going through modernization right now. Some are deploying a system in the next few weeks, months. Others are moving through the replacement of the system right now. And
Isn't this a piece of the infrastructure bill that we hope is about to be passed?
that's not to my,
Because Michael, I feel like we've been hearing that $140 million was going to be brought to bear on this.
so in in the second CARES Act or ARPA bill, there was $2 billion that was set aside for the U.S. Department of Labor to issue to
Right.
states. The U.S. Department of Labor, in its wisdom, decided to, for the most part, keep that money for itself and is offering competitive grants to states who want to modernize components of their system. They are not actually sending money to states to simply upgrade their system. So if we want to for instance, one example is a national wage database, right? So we receive wages from employers. That's how we calculate people's weekly benefit amounts. They're talking about creating a national wage database because people may transfer from state to state, and that slows down the calculation of people's claims. That's one component they're looking to. They're also funding what they're calling tiger teams to figure out different solutions that states could deploy. But I've been adamant with our association, with our congressional delegation, with the U.S. Department of Labor that what we need right now is straight funding to the Vermont Department of
Right.
Labor
Yeah.
to overhaul its entire system.
And that is 140 million, what the ticket is on that, what the price
No,
is?
in the end, and this is only based on what we've seen other states go for, it's somewhere between 30 and $40 million, by the time it's implemented in the end.
So may I ask my question, which I had before, which is, I'd love to go back to basics on the benefits. Each state calculates its own UI benefit. Is that correct?
Correct.
And every year we have an increase, right?
The statute allows for an increase in the maximum benefit amount
So-
every year.
Every year the mainframe is recalculating, and every week, actually, the mainframe recalculates for the thousands of individuals we issue UI checks to.
Not every,
Well, every week, something may change. They have to file every week.
correct.
And so things change within that system.
The way the system works is when somebody files an unemployment insurance claim, we take the wages in their base period and we calculate their weekly benefit amount at that time. That does not change during the life of the claim. What the system will do on a weekly basis is if you are working part-time and reporting earnings, it will deduct those earnings from your weekly benefit amount.
Because, play with me here, Cameron. So if a person is on UI for roughly, what's the average you told us, 14 weeks? Of 10 to 14 weeks?
That sounds,
They're not on
That
for
sounds
26
right,
weeks. They-
Most are
11, okay. So let's say they're on average so every time a claimant comes into the system, and right now we have over 4,000, the mainframe is able to deal with recalculating or calculating an amount, right? So the mainframe is constantly recalculating. So I guess I'm puzzled by the notion that it can't recalculate something as basic. So
So
it strikes,
I just want to be clear, it doesn't recalculate the weekly benefit amount. So let's say,
but for 11 weeks, that's true. But then somebody else comes in and then they get,
so it recalculates it once, and then it has a process where it will deduct from that calculation. But if you receive the maximum of $583 a week, it sets that in the system. And then when you file a new claim, it will, like, again, not a weekly
Right.
claim. If you go through all your weekly claims, you come in a year later, it will then go through that calculation again.
got it. So, but we know not many people get the maximum amount.
40%.
We're only 40%.
25, 20.
Right, but not 50%. Okay. So it would be great if we could turn it all on its head and instead bake in, have we thought of just baking in that our calculation would bake in a benefit that it begins with, that there's a base, instead of talking about it as a benefit, that we just recalculate it with X benefit, or X amount added to every claim from the beginning going forward. Why
So,
wouldn't it be that simple?
yeah, and Senator Stocking will probably remember this from the UI study committee meeting. So Secretary Quinn, the state CIO, testified, whatever it was, a month ago. So there are approximately 250,000 lines of code. And it's not as if that one calculation rests on one line. And there's no process for moving through the system. It's all done, when we talk about adjusting code, it's all done manually. So someone has to go in and review lines of code to adjust. And when we talk about changing that calculation, it has tentacles that reach other factors within the system.
Michael, I get that, but
So
I also get that you recalculate this every year with a different
But we use the
minimum
same-
basis.
but we use the same calculation, right? So that's the part, when you
mean
say,
use
let's
the
just
same-
turn it on its head and create a different calculation, we don't ever change the calculation. So it still runs through the same method of determining a monetary determination. We don't change the process.
So can I call a timeout?
Yeah, sorry.
So the conversation is good. I wanted to talk about this, but obviously you're very knowledgeable in it, but you don't say you're a programmer or
I'm
an
not a programmer.
engineer. And Senator Clarkson, the rest of us are certainly not. I want to ask you this question because I'm not going to get to a potential solution like I hope to today, but part of my solution is based upon an independent consultant from the legislature, from the Joint Fiscal Office, looking under the hood of the mainframe and asking questions. I don't know how extensive it could be, but another set of eyes. Would you have an opposition to fully cooperate with someone like that?
I can't speak to that. And the reason is I would defer to both Cameron as the legal expert in UI, but also our ADS partners who are not here right now.
Well, I'm just,
I'm happy to
It's not that I-
pose the
it's
question.
it's not that I don't believe what you're saying, but we're taking it at face value. And we keep coming up against this thing that we can't change policy because the mainframe is going to crash. You very well may be right, but I would like somebody independent to talk to your experts and maybe they have a better idea. And we do that all the time in terms of audits and stuff like
So
that.
I'm happy to pose that question.
Okay,
back if
okay.
That would help.
So go ahead.
Let me just ask a question. Is it correct, my memory correct, that you warned us about the inability of the system to respond to this kind of change and that you gave the warning to this committee at least 3 times?
Yes,
Correct?
at least 3.
All right. And is it correct also that the Agency of Digital Services agrees with your position?
Yes, my position came from their position.
Well, Senator Brock, I agree that they told us 3 times. And I agree that maybe we were somewhat skeptical of that. And we admit that we don't have knowledge ourselves. That's why I'm asking the question of a third party. But I think the testimony I heard at the summer study would sound very real to me from John Quinn. He says, you can do anything you want if you spend enough money.
Right.
There's a cost benefit analysis and a risk factor, and I don't know where that tipping point is. So, and I don't know whether there are alternatives. So we're going to have to end soon. I want to give you a chance to wrap up. I got to say something. It struck me really to the core. And it's probably my 45 years of being in this building. When you accuse the legislature of not doing due diligence on a non-conformance issue buried in federal statute, when we can barely look at the UI statute as the most convoluted, longest statute in the whole state, and say that we should have found out about this non-conformance issue, as opposed to relying upon you and our legislative council to tell us these things, to put our mind. I cannot believe that statement, that you're blaming us for not doing due diligence, that we should have found out about this in advance.
I'll respond to that. I mean, you do, and you mentioned it, have a team of attorneys at your disposal. And in this
Your
case,
attorney didn't even know about it.
and in this case, chose not to rely on them to build, other than one individual, to build this, but both Cameron and Damian,
Right.
even with their wisdom, said they felt that this would be allowable.
I don't think,
But then in
I don't
the
think
end-
anybody's at fault, but if anybody's more at fault, it's the experts, not lay citizen legislatures. That's all I have to say about it. Anyhow, I'm sorry, Commissioner, but if you want to say a few words, we'll wait around and stay. I'm okay at this point. Yeah, go ahead.
This might be part of your wrap up, but I would just wonder, we had talked so much during this session about data and understanding better who these unemployed Vermonters are, painting a picture of the struggles they're having going back to work. What are you doing to try and better understand that demographic picture, the barriers they're facing, and to address those? So we have a workforce development plan coming from the Department of Labor.
So we have looked at the claimant profile of the 2020 claimants. Data was not easy to come by, only because our system doesn't capture all that data the way it was designed. So we had to think a little creatively on how we captured that information, and it wasn't complete or in terms of comprehensiveness. But we do have some of that information I'd be happy to share. And then when we talk about those that are currently impacted, we are constantly identifying, although again, it's not a runner report in the system and it tells you a breakdown. This is literal data crunching by staff to pull this together. And then, so we have it for a moment in time, right? And if we want to send them back in to do the data crunching again, we can pull a moment in time again. But we were able to some degree take the entire population in 2020 and to the best of our ability break down, what the I'll say demographic, but it could be the individual's demographic. So race, ethnicity, gender, but it could also be their claim demographic. So what is the average benefit amount, or what was the average week of filing, things of that nature. 2020 was a pretty crazy time, if you can remember, and our system did not handle it well. So some of that data is pretty soft, I think, to use the term that our chief economist would say. So again, I wouldn't necessarily say we should build copious amounts of policy on this, but I do think it's good and informative and can inform our decisions going forward. In terms of outreach, we have a number of workforce development efforts currently going on to reach both unemployed or dislocated workers, but also underserved populations or marginalized populations. So from that perspective too, I do know that that was an interest of this committee. So I'm also happy to have our workforce development.
Yes, so Sarah and Hugh might follow up.
Yeah, I was going to say, happy to have her either answer questions or come in and speak to you.
They're doing all sorts of stuff. Right.
Questions. The only thing I was going to add to wrap up, and this was not meant to be final comments, but even as something as simple as the maximum weekly benefit amount, which we know is redetermined each year, since we've had 100% turnover in our mainframe team, and as far back as 2019, even before the pandemic, we began experiencing issues with our mainframe. And so even the most normal of calculations that our mainframe would perform each and every year became challenging. And so for the past 2 years, even the recalculation of the maximum weekly benefit amount has resulted in a number of improper payments going out the door, impacted claimants, people receiving wrong benefit amounts, us needing to adjust benefit amounts. Some of that most recently was also due to how they interweave with the federal programs, the federal pandemic programs. But again, that was something that we had performed each and every year for the past however many years. The maximum weekly benefit amount had been in play, and only in the past 2 years has it started having ripple effects through the system from impacting everybody from the claimant to the employer and beyond. So it's not always about like something new. Even the stuff that we used to be able to do each year without fail is causing problems in our system and is failing us.
Is there any way to do a parallel system within the department? I was looking at the income disregard as an issue. And I can't imagine, the way I understand it, that there's going to be very many people that's going to cause a problem with. Most of the calculations I did, they would wind up with $25 more, regardless of how much money they made. But there are several issues you mentioned. I haven't dug into each one. But is it possible to issue the 4,000 checks as is, not change the mainframe, get an Excel spreadsheet of those people, plug it into a laptop, issue those same people $35, and then go in and identify where there needs to be further tweaks and who's affected, and do it. Don't touch the mainframe, but find those problems and just, I mean, this is not, I don't think it's rocket science, but, you know, there's so few people here, and we're letting this machine dictate what we can do. So I don't know if that's something you thought about, or that's an absolute non-starter for you. There's too many things to uncover and fix later on.
I'll let Cameron talk. I mean, we have talked about the manual aspect of this. That comes with a lot of fear, I think, from everything from more federal compliance and conformity issues to audit requirements, and also.
I just thought I'd throw it out.
No, but also, we were talking about this right before we started the session, just about the fact that when we implemented the Vermont short-term supplemental benefit, it was the managing of that benefit outside the mainframe that actually, I think, for the most part, contributed to the 1099 data breach. You know, again, so we're trying to not do things outside of a system that is, I say proven, but has been audited and is audited on an annual basis for integrity purposes, and try to do less manually, because it typically results in errors. Anything you want to add about doing something manually?
No, I don't think so. I would rather take the risk of changing the mainframe to do something manual at this point.
So I'm just, you know, in my thinking, trying to think creatively around this box and how to keep people whole, is that if there is some way of, on a short-term basis, of getting this benefit out while longer term fixes are established, maybe it's a different funding source. That would be, I guess, the easiest one. But bifurcating this somehow, and not necessarily say that we're wedded to fixing the entire thing for the next 15 years, but just to get us over the hump. I'm just stretching for looking for.
Right, no,
So I don't think that option, is off the table. I think we're more than willing to have those conversations with you. Again, I can't speak for the governor without having talked to him first. But again, we do know that that's an option that USDOL has outlined as a potential, identifying either another funding source or another entity, or even the department issuing it outside of the mainframe, as long as we cover the cost of the benefit and the cost to administer it. Those are the two components that USDOL has identified.
I mean, I'm not saying in any way that I favor this, but just a simple solution would be to do ARPA funding for a couple of years while it's allowable, while the mainframe gets fixed, to go back to trust fund for the rest of it.
But that won't happen because it will not be done in a couple of years.
But you could probably make a couple of changes in a few years to
Well, I was
accomplish
going to
that.
say that, depends on what a couple of years means, but at this point, we're talking, probably 4 years beyond phase one, right? So to Senator Brock's point, we have to RFP the core system.
Well, phase one is not going to be completed for a year to a year and a half.
Right.
Right off the bat.
I don't think we have to wait for one to be completed before we start, the process of securing funding and doing the RFP for the next. So I do think we can overlap some efforts there.
Commissioner, thank you very much. I know this
Thank you.
hasn't been easy for any of us, so
thank you.
we'll hopefully
Cameron.
see
Thank
you on the 12th. We'll try and keep in touch in the interim with any ideas and what further information we might be looking for. Thank you, Cameron.
Yes, sir.